Good morning, everyone. Thank you for attending. Sir Derek and I are of the same vintage, but of rather different backgrounds. When I was a young student in London at the London School of Economics, Sir Derek was a founding member of the National Theatre in London.
That's right.
And all of the economic nerds at London School of Economics did not often get over to you to see Hamlet.
Well, I didn't get to the London School of Economics very much. So.
What you were doing was more interesting than studying fiscal fluctuations. Now, first place, I want to thank you all. There's so many of you are sitting close. One thing about these rooms is it's like college, the freshman year. Everyone sits at the back so the teacher won't call on them. So thank you. Now, sir, I am ill-qualified to talk to you about Shakespeare. Therefore, I would love to talk about the theater, film, but most of all about acting and about some of the wonderful characters that you and I have each encountered over the years.
Yes.
As an illustration, I was fascinated in your remarks the other day about Richard Burton and about how he, indeed, on Hamlet, I think he did see a couple of your performances and became a fan. Could you talk about that a bit?
Well, I first came across Richard Burton when I was a schoolboy. I'm very lucky that I've been born, bred, lived all my life in London. And when I was a teenager at the local grammar school, we used to have school parties going to the London Theatre. And one of the theatres we used to go to was the Old Vic. The Old Vic had a great classical tradition. And there was one particular season in the 50s that I remember going to and seeing Richard Burton. At that time, I think as a teenager, I already wanted to be an actor. I had no gift for anything else. I can't do anything. I never wanted to be a bus driver or a lorry driver or a doctor or a scientist. I wanted to get up there and show off. And I'm sitting in the audience watching this actor called Richard Burton, who, for any aspiring classical actor, had everything. He had it in spades. He was a looker. He had a wonderful grace, a masculinity, a fantastic voice. He had everything that an aspiring classical actor would like to possess. And then we fast forward to many years later, and he's making a film called The Medusa Touch. And my agent has got me a couple of days on it. Tiny part, but I'd find myself sitting in a canvas-back chair next to Richard Burton. And I've left one thing out. When I was at university, we did a production of Hamlet, and we took it on tour to Europe. And one of the places that we played was in Lausanne, in Switzerland, which is where Richard Burton lived. And he knew the boy who was playing Claudius in our production of Hamlet, and he came to see it. He liked what he saw, and when I got back to university, there was a letter from him saying that if ever I wanted to become a professional actor, he would do what he could to help me. A letter that I subsequently lost, unfortunately. I had a similar letter years later from Olivier, which I also lost. Anyway, so that was my second little brush with Richard Burton. And then finally, sitting beside him on this film set, he said, what are you up to? Anything apart from the film? I said, yeah, I'm about to play Hamlet at the Old Vic. And he said, I'll come see you. And he did. And he came round afterwards. And he was glorious. He said, he invited me out to dinner. I said, do you mind if I stay in the dressing room while you get yourself ready and we can go out together? Lovely. On the way out, he said, do you mind if we go and stand on the stage? I said, no, of course, of course. So the two of us went out onto the stage of the Old Vic, empty auditorium, and he said, I haven't stood on this stage for 25 years. And I said, I know, I saw you. All those years ago, I was sitting up there in the gods, and now I'm standing here with you, and it's rather wonderful. And I said, do you have any memories of the time when you played Hamlet here? And he said, my abiding memory was one performance. Winston Churchill was sitting in the middle of the front row, exactly where you are, sir. And when Burton got to be or not to be, Churchill started speaking it with him, out loud. Said, I've never forgot that. And he said he knew it. He kept it up with me all the way through. But the great thing about him was, there he was, Richard Burton, star of stage, screen, and radio, worldwide, global fame, rich Hollywood movie star, and all he wanted to talk about was theatre, and particularly Shakespeare.
But you see, one thing that you said the other day to me, which resonated, was that it's wonderful to be an actor in the theater, but actors in the theater don't become rich. So that is true. So my encounter with Richard Burton is that he saw me and said, you know, I am a theater actor, and I intend to become very rich. And let's have lunch today, because I'd like to introduce you to my wife, Elizabeth, and I'd like to talk to you about how to become richer. And he was shooting then a movie called The Sandpiper.
Oh, yes.
In Big Sur, which he asserted that they only accepted those roles because they wanted to be in Big Sur and they wanted to be paid. It was an awful movie. and Burton and Elizabeth Taylor went on and on, drank a lot of wine, and talked about how they felt a sense of doom in that as they were determined to be big movie stars and not just this, but they sensed that their careers would immediately go down the tube as a result. And they were right. Their careers did go down the tube, except the next picture after The Sandpiper was Who's Afraid of Virginia Woolf, as you remember.
Yes.
And they were extraordinary. Yeah. And then everything they did after that was consistent with their gloomy forecast. Yeah. And he was a very unhappy film actor, I think.
What I got out of that night with him and the conversation with him was that he longed to get back to the theatre. That's sort of where his heart was. My view of him, from an audience point of view, he was a colossus on the stage. He had everything going for him, and he was wonderful. And I think there is a sense that when he became the big movie star, it was fine. He was rich, famous, all those things, but his heart was still in the wings of a theatre. And
can we talk about Olivier in that context? Now, explain your first encounters with him.
Gosh, I am very lucky, and in fact, you're looking at the luckiest actor that ever was. It has dogged me through my career. A luck in the sense of being given the opportunity to strut whatever stuff I've got to strut. And I've been given untold opportunities, for which I am deeply grateful. And one of them, one early one, was meeting Olivier. And in my early 20s, I was in a repertory company. The repertory system in England now is practically disappeared, really. I was probably part of the last generation that grew up with a very vibrant, healthy repertoire system. Every town in the country had its repertory theatre. I went to the Birmingham Repertory Theatre straight from university. I stayed there for 3 years. I didn't go to drama school, but that was my drama school because it was a new play every 4 weeks for 3 years. And that was a huge, huge learning curve. I started tiny parts, bit parts here and there. Gradually, I was given larger parts until I ended up as the juvenile lead. And one season, I think it was 1963, it was the 50th anniversary of the Birmingham Rep, and to celebrate, they were going to do the 3 Shakespeare plays they'd never done in those 50 years. They were Titus Andronicus, Henry VIII, and Troilus and Cressida. And I was playing Troilus, Henry VIII, and Aaron the Moor in Titus. One Wednesday matinee, I am playing Shakespeare's Henry VIII. I've got padding, I've got moustaches, beards, the lot on. And we finish the matinee, we go back to the dressing room. I'm sharing a dressing room with Cardinal Wolsey at the time. And there is a knock on the door. I always get out of my costume and makeup quickly. I go down to the Cardoma for my tea. So I wasn't dressed as Henry VIII when this person came in. Knock on the door, come in. It's Laurence Olivier. Cardinal Wolsey and I were struck dumb, of course. He came to me and he said, well done, very good, very good. Then went to Cardinal Wolsey, whom he lavished with praise. I mean, he was still dressed as Cardinal Wolsey, so he knew who he was. And then he left, you know, and I thought, and then about 20, 30 seconds later, there was another knock on the door, and he came back. And he looked at me, and in those ringing tones of his, he said, "You were Henry?" And I said, yes, sir, yes, I was Henry. Then I got a lot of praise. And I got a letter offering me a job, which that summer was the 2nd season of the Chichester Festival Theatre, which he'd created the year before. And that company at Chichester in the summer of 1963 became the original English National Theatre at home at the Old Vic I stayed with him for the next 7 years. And during which time he was my director, my fellow actor, my mentor, my father figure, and ultimately my dear friend. I owe him a lot, as do lots of other young actors that he was very generous to. People like Anthony Hopkins, Michael Gambon.
My encounter with him toward the end of his career touches on that subject, because there's a tension that you described between theater acting and film acting.
Yes.
And so when I encountered him, he had just accepted a role at Paramount to do Marathon Man, where he played the malevolent Nazi dentist.
Yes.
His co-star was Dustin Hoffman. And Olivier loved getting the role because, as you remember, at that stage of his career, he was uninsurable because of cancer.
Yeah.
So we managed to obtain insurance through Lloyd's of London for 6 weeks. So we had to do the role quickly. Yeah. But he couldn't stand Dustin Hoffman because Dustin Hoffman was the ultimate film actor. He would insist on, there were his lines, but he had a better idea about the lines.
He was method, wasn't he?
He was method.
Yes.
And so Laurence Olivier liked the script. He knew the script, understood it, and he wanted to play the script. And at one point, I remember when he looked at Dustin Hoffman, who was ulcerating about whether to take the shirt off in the scene or put the shirt on. And Olivier finally said, "Dustin, do the damn role. Forget about the shirt." He was so impatient with his methody.
Yes.
But again, you are not in love with acting in film, I gather, because of the fact that your role is, to a degree, controlled by the director, by the editor. It isn't you as you are a stage actor. It is you as filtered. Now, how do you feel about that?
Well, I think any performance in front of a camera is dictated by that machine, that camera. It's mainly about thought. It's about eyes and thinking and reaction and truth, of course. The difference between being in a theatre and being one of the obvious differences is that in a studio, in a film studio, you are surrounded by safety nets. If they can't hear you, then they put the microphone closer. If you forget your lines, you do it again, umpteen times if need be. Bump into the furniture, do it again. On stage, if you any of those hazards, you would all see it happen. The audience sees it. That makes theatre acting exciting and terrifying. I have often stood in the wings thinking, what a silly way to earn a living. Putting myself through the stress, the anxiety of this night after night. Try playing Hamlet or Lear 8 times a week. But once you get on there, of course, it's your element. It's you jump into the aquarium and you swim. And that's where you exist. But it is frightening. There are no safety nets. Anything can go wrong at any time. And you've got to be ready to ride those mistakes. Whereas in a film studio, it's much less stressful. And you are indulged much more. And ultimately, what you, the public, see is really somebody else's choice. An editor and a director's choice. They will take this little bit and join it to that little bit. And so the ultimate picture you get, and the ultimate, what distinguishes one actor from another, apart from other things, is timing, is the way our rhythm, our tempo. Well, then all that can be forcibly created on the screen by taking little bits and editing all together. The pace and the tempo of the performance is created in the editing suite. And sort of has nothing to do with you.
I think I would argue with you in one small degree that there have been cases where I have lived through an actor or actress in a role where, because of all the editing and because of the takes, they discovered a character that they didn't understand going in. I mean, someone mentioned Mia Farrow the other day. Now, I lived through Mia Farrow in Rosemary's Baby, where she had no idea who that character was until Roman Polanski, who was nothing if not dogged, made her do 30 takes and dig into a whole nother persona. So I think in that sense, film acting can be a voyage of discovery. Whereas more with the theater, you know who you are going in. Do you disagree with that?
No, I would, rather than say a voyage of discovery, I would say it's indulgent. I wish I could take 30 takes, because I might get there after 30 times, but the stage actor's got to do it first time. And that's what gives it job satisfaction. I mean, we said earlier on, stage actors are not the wealthy actors. The wealthy actors I know are film actors, closely followed by television actors. But stage actors, I don't know of any wealthy stage actor. But that's not the point. It's the job satisfaction that is so enormous on stage. I mean, imagine 3.5 hours of Hamlet. You've climbed Everest every evening, and you've made it to the top. There's no bigger satisfaction than that. And you know, to hell with the money. I'd like both, but the job satisfaction is enough for me.
See, among I appreciate among the stars who I got to know and who I disliked most intensely was Marlon Brando. And one of his things that he always said to you was that he didn't like being an actor. And you could sense that. I mean, I remember during The Godfather, Brando always arranged on the other side of the camera to have his lines attached to a wall or something. And I once asked him why he would not simply deliver his lines. Was it just because he wanted to delay and have the actors and the director be more frantic? And I appreciate the candor. He said, yes, that is actually the main reason. I sort of like that delay. Let them wait and suffer for me. But do you think that Brando really disliked acting that much, or do you think that was part of his technique?
Well, I would think he was obviously using his antipathy to acting, maybe his hatred of acting, his dislike of acting. He was using it as the source, the well of his technique and his talent. Whatever he'd got, wherever he was coming from, if it was anger, if it was distaste, if it was a desire to mess everybody else up, that's obviously how he got his rocks off, and that's where his acting came from. And ultimately, he was a bloody wonderful actor. Yeah. But that was his method. I'm glad I never worked with him. But that's obviously his method. And every actor has their own way, their own method of working, as long as they can tap on the truth. I was always told that Brando, in one play, I can't remember what it was a stage play, there was a staircase, and he started at the top of the staircase, and his hand was down the banister rail, but he'd covered the banister rail with onion. And he kept doing that with his, and of course, he got to the bottom and he was in tears. But it was all calm. He'd taken the onion and put it in his eyes, and the onion put it in his eyes. Got to the bottom. But, you know, if that's the way you do it, that's the way you do it. Mm-hmm. And acting is sleight of hand. I mean, a lovely way to describe acting is craft, skill, technique. Good, lovely words, lovely words. Another word, just as valid, is trickery. Actors have tricks. They have bags of tricks. And they often, I sit in the theatre and I see an actor do something, I'll take that and put it in my bag of tricks. Yeah, good. But it's a combination of all those things, of course. But Guilgud used to say that, 8 Hamlets a week, you can't actually do Hamlet fully 8 times a week. It's superhuman. And he said a couple of times a week, I'd send technique on. Good for him.
You know, in terms of technique, big stars always fascinate me because I got to know Cary Grant reasonably well. And I remember that he went through a period of his career where he believed that the secret to his success was LSD. And he said that an actor, in order to really understand the characters that he must play, should take a lot of acid, because through acid there's personal growth and you get insight into people, into characters. Now, I don't know if you ever took LSD as part of your technique, but it struck me as a rather unique approach.
He was obviously not a stage performer. I think probably you can get away with that on screen, but certainly not on stage. And Cary Grant, I sort of grew up with when I was a kid. Go to the movies. Humphrey Bogart, Cary Grant, Gary Cooper, all of them. They were personality actors. You went in the course of a year and you saw 3 Humphrey Bogart films. You wanted Humphrey Bogart. When you paid your money, you wanted Cary Grant. didn't want anybody else. And so, in a sense, they were playing themselves to perfection. And it's sort of, their technique was such that it had gone beyond technique. It had gone beyond just personality. But that's what they were selling. Rather than inhabiting a character, rather than pretending to be somebody else. Sometimes perhaps they had a different makeup or different costume, but basically they were selling themselves, and that's what you were buying.
Yes.
That's what you wanted.
But one of the things that intruded upon the careers of some of the early film actors was the sexuality. In other words, the whole idea of, let's say, Spencer Tracy, of admitting that he was really a gay person and dealing with that, so intruded upon their personal development that it hurt their careers. I think that was true of Montgomery Clift as well. And again, one of the things that I admire about the theater is that theater actors are much more, it doesn't trouble them, they're more open about who they are.
They're not selling sex.
Yeah.
Movie stars are selling sex. Sure, the handsome man, the beautiful woman. Thelma Ritter was never, she was a wonderful actress, but nobody had a problem. Well, perhaps somebody had a poster of Thelma Ritter up in the bedroom, but I would doubt it. But you know, Marilyn Monroe, all these people we're talking about, they were selling sex. You looked at them and imagined what it would be like to sleep with them. You couldn't avoid it. That's what they were about.
That's right.
Whatever part they were playing. But that isn't the same in the theatre. That is not what's on sale. That is it's a different form of acting. It's not a personality roster. It's something more interesting. And not necessarily deeper, but certainly something more intrinsically attractive. And there is a magic of going into a theatre, darkened auditorium, curtain going up. There they are in real time. Anything can happen, and they take you on a journey. They make you laugh. They make you cry. You've had an experience by the time the final curtain has come down. You've had something unique, absolutely unique, and it won't be the same the next night for the next audience. They will get something unique, but it won't be absolutely the same as that audience saw. There will be tiny, tiny differences. And that's what is so magic about theatre. And it's so alive and vibrant, and as I say, totally unique. You couldn't get it anywhere else. And that, for me, is the excitement. And
well, one of the elements to unfortunately, in my family, there are actors. And one of the interesting things.
Unfortunately.
One of the things that I know my nephew, who's an actor, tells me about is that we as the audience don't appreciate some of the details that are so important in their relationship to the audience. Like, he hated at one of his shows was a huge theater on Broadway, and he wanted, like this, a smaller audience. He said, you don't know how an actor is devoured sometimes because the theater is too big, or because the audience is conditioned for a certain kind of performance, they're conditioned by the moment.
Yes.
And he remembers, for example, he was in The Producers, the Mel Brooks thing, the Mel Brooks show, and he remembered how performing the 2 days after 9/11, when the audience was sitting in a state of shock, that you were there doing a comedy. You know, what were you expected to do? Were you supposed to be funny, or were you, and therefore take them in a different place, or did you really go with them in their own gloom and doom? But anyway, it strikes me because when you do interact with your audience to a degree, do you not when you're out there? And how do you react to their impressions?
Well, I suppose it's different certainly between drama and comedy. With comedy, you need an audience to laugh. You need to know they're there and they're reacting and they are responding to you. In a drama where you really need their silence, you really need their heart and their attention and their spirit to come towards you. As you do in comedy, comedy is much more difficult because we rely on your reactions. We need to know that we've taken you with us, that we've hooked you. Whereas we could kid ourselves in a drama that your silence is attention. You could be fast asleep. But an actor's antennae is always very, very sharp with an audience. And most actors, I would think all actors, certainly all the best actors, have a third eye. Mm-hmm. They are on stage with these two eyes. They've also got an eye that's right in the center there, and it's watching them. and it's judging them, and it's appraising them. But part of any stage actor is in the audience. There's always a part of out there, because it has to be. We have to be part of you, watching what we're doing. That's the trick of it. I get back to the word tricks. But we have to, in a sense, self-criticize ourselves as we're going along. Otherwise, we don't know what effect we're having. We've got to know the effect you're having on the audience. Otherwise, what are you doing it for? We're not doing it for us. There was, years ago, there was a visit to England with the Lee Strasberg company. They were doing The Three Sisters, Chekhov's Three Sisters. And it came to London, and it got terrible reviews. The London critics hated it. And I went to see it with a group of friends, and we sort of knew why the critics had not liked it, because they were all marvelous actors, with Sandy Dennis, Luther Adler, wonderful American actors, but they were method, they were all inside it, they were feeling it, they were crying, they were happy, they were all the emotions. And we up front weren't getting any of that. We were watching them cry, laugh, do it all. But they weren't letting us in. They weren't doing it for us. They were doing it was masturbation. They were doing it for themselves. Yeah. And we weren't getting anything. They were doing it wonderfully. But no, what are we sitting out here for? You know.
Now, do you ever read the critics, or
No.
do you ignore them?
No. Don't read critics. No.
Well, one of my great satisfactions as a newspaper editor was having the chance to fire a critic now.
Oh!
Now, I love dishing with Sir Derek, as you can see. But if there are any questions that you have for him, I would love to entertain them. Yes.
Great honor and privilege it is to be here. What I remember is your performance in Claudius.
Yes.
Yes.
Well,
I realize, of course, that you didn't stutter. So I'm wondering how you could become, the ultimate stutterer. So, and convince us all that that was your natural state. What can you do?
Just to repeat the question.
Yes, the question was, excuse me, it's apropos of Claudius and the stammer. Actually, it's a stammer, not a stutter, which I didn't know at the time. A stutter is, when, like the BBC, when I first started, I got the script, and say a word like please was spelt with 4 P's. which indicated that I had to. After a time, they saved on typewriter ribbon, and they didn't do that. They left it to me. But a stutter is that, please. But a stammer is when you can't get that, please. That's the stammer. And that's what Claudius had. And, it was 43 years ago, that. 1976, yeah. And I was by no means first choice. By no means, no. Originally, they wanted two Claudii, a young one and an old one. And that's what they were going to do. And the old one, they wanted Charlton Heston. That fell through. And then they went to a famous English comedian called Ronnie Barker. That fell through. And then the producer had the idea of, wouldn't it be better if the audience followed the same actor? We aged the same actor, rather than have two different actors. And that's when I came in, and because I had done something on the BBC 5 years before, when I had to age from a teenager to late 50s. And they said, what about Derek? And of course, the London Films, who owned the rights to I, Claudius, was an American company. And they didn't know me from a hole in the ground. And I had to charm the head of London Films for them to take a risk. I was a risk because I was not known except to the producer and the director. But it was one of those parts that every actor longs for because it makes a difference to your career, and Claudius did. Claudius, within 2 years of Claudius, I was on Broadway, which would never have happened if Claudius hadn't come around. So I worship Claudius every day. Yeah. So
Is a question there?
so yes, I will come back to you, sir.
Sir Derek, what are you working on right now?
I have just finished dying in a thing called The Crown on Netflix. And they've done 2 series, and now they're doing series 3 and series 4, and the cast have all changed. It's a different queen, and I've been playing the dying Duke of Windsor in that, with Geraldine Chaplin as my Wallace, which is lovely. I finished that last week, so I'm now unemployed. If anybody's out there,
Well, on behalf of my wife, we resent the fact that you were killed off in that.
Sir.
You said before that part of acting is things go wrong.
Yeah.
Can you give us a few instances when things went wrong and how you handled it on the stage?
The part of acting is when things go wrong. Can I give an example of something going wrong? Yes. There is an example. One of many. Yeah. Imagine it. Gershwin Theatre, New York. The play is Cyrano de Bergerac. I am playing Cyrano. It's a genius play. It's the most glorious play. You get to the 5th act, and if you've got the first 4 acts right, then the 5th act it becomes unbearably moving. Even to read it on the page, it's just wonderful. The situation is, Roxanne, for 15 years, has been a nun, ever since her love, Christian, the beautiful young Christian, died at the siege of Arras. She has been a nun in a nunnery. Cyrano has visited her nearly every day for those 15 years. This particular day, he comes to visit her, and he's been the victim of a successful, ultimately, assassination attempt. He's dying. She doesn't know that he's dying. And he says to her, do you remember Christian's last letter? She said, of course I do, of course. I've kept it next to my heart for 15 years. He said, would you read it to me? Of course. And she takes out the letter, and she starts reading. And he joins in, because he wrote it. And she suddenly realizes that all those years of devotion that she's given to the beautiful Christian, the soul, the spirit, was this man dying next to her. He'd written all the letters. He'd poured out all the love. And it's a wonderful moment. It's a wonderful moment. The Gershwin Theatre, I am playing Cyrano. A wonderful Irish actress called Sinead Cusack is playing Roxanne. I say, do you remember Christian's last letter? And she says, yes, of course, I've kept it in my bosom for 15 years. I said, will you read it to me? Of course. No letter. It's in the wings on the prop table. She goes off to get it in the prop table. It's on that prop table. I am sitting there, full house. All I can hear, with Sinead running around the back, where's the fucking letter? Where's the fucking letter? Eventually, she finds the fucking letter, and she comes on, and she's wonderful. She's in such a state by this time, and she's wonderful. Anyway, we get to the end, and it's ruined. I mean, the last 10 minutes of the show has been ruined for me. We get back to the dressing room, and she says, I'm sorry. I said, no, forget about it. It's one of those things. Don't worry, don't worry. And about 50 minutes later, there's a knock on the door, and it's Sinead. And she brings in a friend, an actress, an American actress, famous American method actress. And she says to this actress, go and tell him. The actress is Shelley Winters, who says that moment, this is a method actress talking, that moment was so real, so perfect. And because she's a nun, she wouldn't do that in front of him. She would go off and get it and take it out and do it up again. And she thought it was wonderful, wonderful. I could have killed her.
Well, unfortunately, it is such fun to talk with you about all of this. And thank you for your stories and for your vivid recollections. And it's a delight to meet you, sir.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Thank you.